The streetlights on Burnham Avenue had been broken for as long as anyone could remember. Three of them, lined up like rotten teeth in a jaw that the city had forgotten how to fix. They stood dark and useless along the stretch of cracked sidewalk that connected Ridgeway Elementary to the cluster of low-rise apartment buildings where the families who could not afford to live anywhere else raised their children on prayers and second jobs. It was the kind of neighborhood where the ice cream truck never came, where the playground equipment rusted in place because no one from the parks department ever showed up with a wrench or a can of paint. The air always smelled like exhaust fumes and fried food from the carry-out spot on the corner, and in the summer, the heat rose from the asphalt in visible waves that made the whole block shimmer like a mirage, like the place itself was not quite real, like it might vanish if you blinked too hard. September of 1997 had arrived with a meanness that felt personal. The kind of late summer heat that pressed down on everything and everyone, turning tempers short and patience thin. School had been back in session for less than 2 weeks, and already the halls of Ridgeway Elementary smelled like floor wax and anxiety, the particular kind of dread that belonged to children who understood, even at 8 and 9 and 10 years old, that the world was not built to be kind to them. And it was here, in this forgotten pocket of a city that had too many forgotten pockets to count, that two lives collided for the first time. Neither of them knew it yet. Neither of them could have possibly understood what that collision would eventually become. But the universe has a long memory, and it always, always collects on its debts. Ziva Okafor was 10 years old, and she was already tired in ways that no child should be. Not the kind of tired that comes from playing too hard or staying up past bedtime, but the deep, structural exhaustion that settles into your bones when you grow up carrying weight that was never meant for your shoulders. Her mother, Adonaya, worked 2 jobs to keep them in their apartment on the 4th floor of the Burnham Avenue complex. Days at the textile factory on Grover Street, where she stood for 9 hours feeding fabric through industrial machines that had taken the tip of her left index finger 3 years ago. Nights at the care home on Wexford, where she bathed elderly patients and changed their bedding and listened to their stories with a gentleness that never wavered no matter how tired she was. Ziva saw her mother for exactly 45 minutes each day, from 6:15 in the evening, when Adonaya came home to change uniforms and heat up whatever Ziva had cooked from the supplies they bought every Sunday at the discount grocery, to 7 o'clock, when she kissed Ziva's forehead and walked out the door again, smelling like lavender lotion and industrial soap. In those 45 minutes, Adonaya performed miracles. She checked homework, braided hair, listened to the small dramas of 5th-grade life, and somehow made Ziva feel like the most important person in the world. She had a way of cupping Ziva's face in her rough, calloused hands and looking at her with such fierce, concentrated love that it felt like standing in a beam of light. "You are not what this place says you are," Adonaya told her daughter every single night, the words spoken like a prayer, like a spell cast against a world that wanted to shrink her daughter into something small and manageable. "You are extraordinary, Ziva, and one day, the whole world is going to know it." Ziva believed her, mostly. She believed her when she brought home report cards with straight A's that her teachers seemed surprised by, as though academic excellence from a girl who looked like her was some kind of anomaly. She believed her when she won the school spelling bee, and the principal shook her hand, with a stiffness that suggested he had been hoping for a different outcome. But belief is a fragile thing when you are 10 years old and the evidence of your own insignificance surrounds you like wallpaper. Ziva was tall for her age, with her mother's dark skin and her absent father's sharp, watchful eyes. She wore her hair in neat cornrows that Adonaya redid every Sunday morning, humming gospel songs under her breath while Ziva sat on the floor between her knees and tried not to squirm. She had a gap between her 2 front teeth that she hated and a laugh that she loved, a big, reckless sound that burst out of her before she could stop it and made people turn their heads. She was fierce without knowing it, brave without meaning to be, and completely unaware that the most important moment of her life was 3 days away. The boy arrived on a Wednesday. Ziva noticed him immediately, not because he did anything to draw attention, but because he seemed to be trying so hard not to. He was small, even smaller than the other kids in their grade, with a bowl cut that looked like someone had placed an actual bowl on his head and trimmed around the edges. His clothes were clean, but clearly not new. A white button-down shirt that was slightly too large, and dark pants that had been hemmed unevenly, one leg a full inch shorter than the other. He carried a backpack that was almost as big as he was, and he walked with his shoulders hunched forward, like he was trying to fold himself into the smallest possible version of himself. Mrs. Pemberton introduced him to the class with the particular brand of cheerful obliviousness that teachers deploy when they have no idea what they are doing. Everyone, this is Seo Hwan-yoon. He just moved here from South Korea, and he is very excited to be joining our class. I know you will all make him feel welcome. Seo Hwan-yoon did not look excited. He looked terrified. His eyes swept across the classroom like a searchlight, cataloging every face, every potential threat, every exit. He clutched the straps of his backpack with both hands, knuckles white, and when Mrs. Pemberton directed him to the empty desk beside the window, he walked to it with the careful, measured steps of someone crossing a minefield. Ziva watched him settle into his seat, watched him arrange his supplies with a precision that bordered on ritualistic, each pencil parallel to the next, his notebook centered exactly in the middle of his desk. He did not look at anyone. He did not speak. He sat perfectly still and stared at the blackboard with an intensity that suggested he was trying to memorize every crack in its surface. She recognized the look on his face. It was the same look she saw in the mirror on the mornings when the whispers in the hallway got too loud, when the world felt too big and too hostile and too determined to remind her that she did not belong. It was the look of someone who was bracing for impact. She did not know his language. She did not know his story. She did not know that his father had moved them here to escape debts that followed him like shadows, that his mother had stayed behind in Seoul, with a promise to join them that would never be kept, or that this small, terrified boy would one day become one of the most powerful men on the Korean peninsula. All she knew was that he was alone, and she understood what that felt like. And Ziva Okafor had never been the kind of person who could watch someone suffer in silence. It happened on a Friday, during the 20-minute recess that was supposed to be the best part of the school day. The September heat had finally loosened its grip, replaced by a breeze that carried the first faint promise of autumn, and the playground was full of noise and movement. Children running and shouting and burning off the energy that had been building inside them all morning like steam in a kettle. Seo Kwan was sitting alone on the concrete steps near the side entrance, a spot that offered a clear view of the playground without requiring him to actually participate in it. He had a book open on his lap, a Korean English dictionary that Ziva had noticed him carrying everywhere like a lifeline, and he was mouthing words silently to himself, his brow furrowed in concentration. Ziva was playing double dutch with her friends Katura and Niobe near the fence when she heard the first shout. "Hey, new kid." "Yeah, you. The one who can't talk." The voice belonged to Marcus Treadwell, a sixth grader who had been held back twice and wore his bitterness about it like a badge of honor. He was big for his age, thick-necked and broad-shouldered, with a mean streak that the teachers either did not see or chose to ignore. He stood over Seo Kwan with two of his friends flanking him like lieutenants, their shadows falling across the smaller boy like a stain. I said, "Hey, you deaf or something? You speak English, or you just sit there looking stupid all day?" Seo Kwan looked up from his dictionary, and Ziva saw his face go through a rapid series of changes. Confusion first, then understanding, then a careful, deliberate blankness that she recognized as a survival mechanism. He was trying to become invisible, trying to give them nothing to react to, hoping that if he was boring enough, they would move on. It did not work. Marcus snatched the dictionary out of Seokwan's hands, holding it up like a trophy. What is this? You still learning how to talk? He flipped through the pages with exaggerated contempt, then tossed the book to one of his friends, who caught it with a laugh. You don't belong here. Why don't you go back to wherever you came from? I belong here. The words came out small and heavily accented, barely audible above the noise of the playground, but they came. Seokwan's hands were trembling, but his jaw was set in a line that spoke of a stubbornness that ran deeper than fear. I belong here just like you. Marcus laughed, a cruel sound that had no warmth in it. No, you don't, he said, and shoved him. It was not a hard shove, not by Marcus's standards, but Seokwan was small and unprepared, and he went down hard, his palms scraping against the concrete with a sound that made Ziva's stomach clench. His dictionary lay where it had been thrown, pages fluttering in the breeze, and something about the sight of it. That book he carried everywhere, his one connection to a language he could understand, lying in the dirt like it was worthless, snapped something inside Ziva that she did not know could break. She was moving before she made a conscious decision to move, get away from him. Her voice cut through the playground noise like a blade, loud and clear and vibrating with a fury that surprised even her. Marcus turned to look at her, his expression caught somewhere between amusement and disbelief. She was a fifth grader, a girl, and she was half his weight. The math of the situation, by his calculations, was firmly in his favor. Mind your business, Ziva. This ain't got nothing to do with you. I said get away from him. She stepped between Marcus and Seokwan, her body a shield she had not planned to become. She could feel the smaller boy behind her, could hear his ragged breathing, and something about his fear made her angrier than she had ever been in her life. He didn't do anything to you. He's just sitting here reading. What's wrong with you? Marcus stepped closer, using his height to try to intimidate her, his shadow swallowing hers. You want to be his girlfriend or something? You want to protect your little boyfriend? The playground had gone quiet. Ziva could feel every eye on her, could feel the weight of the moment pressing against her like a physical force. She was scared. She would never deny that. Marcus Treadwell was bigger, stronger, and meaner than she would ever be. And she knew that what she was doing could end badly for her in ways that her mother would be unable to fix in 45 minutes. But behind her, a boy who had already lost his mother, his country, and every familiar thing in his world was sitting on the ground with bloody palms, and nobody else was moving. Nobody else was going to move. He is not my boyfriend, Ziva said, her voice steady even though her knees were shaking. He is a person, and you don't get to treat people like that. Not while I'm standing here. Marcus shoved her. She fell backward, landing hard on the concrete beside Seokwan, pain shooting through her tailbone and up her spine. But before Marcus could say another word, before he could press his advantage, Ziva was back on her feet, her fists clenched at her sides, her eyes blazing with a fire that made Marcus take a step back, without realizing he was doing it. Is that all you got? She said. And something in her voice, something ancient and unbreakable, made Marcus Treadwell, for the first time in his life, uncertain. A teacher arrived then, finally, belatedly, the way adults always seem to arrive after the damage was done. Marcus got a week of detention. Ziva got a lecture about fighting that she sat through in stony silence, and Seokwan Yun got his dictionary back, its pages slightly crumpled but intact. He found her after school, waiting by the chain-link fence while she looked for her apartment key in her backpack. He did not say anything at first. He just stood there, holding his dictionary against his chest like a shield, watching her with eyes that were too old for his face. Then he held something out to her. A small folded piece of paper, its edges neat and precise, creased with the same meticulous care he applied to everything. She took it and unfolded it carefully. It was a drawing, a picture of two figures, one taller and one smaller, standing side by side. The taller figure had cornrows and a gap-toothed smile. The smaller one was holding a book. Above them, in shaky English letters that must have taken him a long time to form, were 3 words. "Thank you, friend." Ziva looked up from the drawing and met Seohwan's eyes, and something passed between them in that moment, silent and enormous and completely beyond the comprehension of 2 children standing on a cracked sidewalk in a neighborhood the world had forgotten. She smiled at him, and he smiled back, a tiny, uncertain thing that transformed his whole face. "You're welcome," she said. And then, because she was Ziva, and she had never known how to leave well enough alone, she added, "You want to walk home together? My building is right there." He nodded, and they walked, side by side, through the broken streetlights and the shimmering heat. 2 children who did not share a language or a culture or a history, but who had, in the space of a single afternoon, become the most important people in each other's world. Neither of them could have known that this moment, this small act of courage on a forgotten playground, would echo across decades and oceans and reshape both of their lives in ways that would have seemed impossible if anyone had tried to explain them. But the universe has a long memory, and it always collects on its debts. 22 years is a long time, long enough for a neighborhood to change its face without changing its bones. Long enough for a little girl with cornrows and a gap-toothed smile to grow into a woman who had fought for every single thing she had ever earned. Long enough for a little boy with a bowl cut and a Korean English dictionary to disappear so completely from her life that he existed only in the faded drawing she still kept in the bottom drawer of her nightstand, tucked between old birthday cards and a photograph of her mother that she could not bear to frame. Ziva Okafor was 32 years old now, and the world had done its best to grind her down. It had not succeeded, but not for lack of trying. She had put herself through college on a patchwork of scholarships, work-study programs, and sheer stubbornness that her professors mistook for natural talent. A degree in social work from a state university, followed by a master's degree that she completed while working full-time at a community outreach center in the same neighborhood where she had grown up. Somewhere along the way, she had earned her emergency medical responder certification, a practical decision born from too many incidents at the center where children arrived with injuries, and no ambulance came fast enough. The Burnham Avenue apartment complex was still there, though Adonaya had finally moved out 6 years ago, relocating to a smaller place near the care home where she still worked. Her body slower now, her hands more swollen, but her spirit as unbreakable as ever. Ziva had stayed. Not because she lacked options, but because she believed, with a conviction that bordered on faith, that the children growing up in these forgotten pockets of the city needed someone who understood what it felt like to be invisible. She ran an after-school program called Bridge House out of a converted storefront on Grover Street, 3 blocks from the factory where her mother had lost her fingertip. The program served 67 children between the ages of 6 and 14, providing homework help, meals, mentoring, and a safe place to exist for the hours between the end of school and whenever their parents could collect them. She was good at it. She was extraordinary at it. But extraordinary does not pay the electric bill, and the city's funding for community programs had been cut for the 3rd consecutive year, leaving Bridge House operating on donations, volunteer labor, and Ziva's refusal to accept that anything she loved could die from neglect. It was a Thursday evening in mid-October when the first crack appeared in the ordinary surface of her life. She was locking up Bridge House, the last of the children collected by a grandmother who apologized 3 times for being late, when a black sedan pulled to the curb in front of the building. It was the kind of car that did not belong on Grover Street. Sleek and polished, and so aggressively expensive that it looked like it had been transported from another dimension. The windows were tinted past the point of legality, and the engine idled with the quiet confidence of machinery that cost more than most people on this block earned in a year. Ziva watched it with the practiced wariness of a woman who had grown up knowing that unfamiliar cars in the neighborhood rarely brought good news. She tightened her grip on her keys, arranging them between her fingers the way her mother had taught her, and kept walking toward her own car, a 12-year-old sedan with a cracked windshield and a passenger door that only opened from the inside. The window rolled down. "Excuse me." The voice was male, polite, and carried an accent she could not immediately place. "Are you Miss Ziva Okafor?" She stopped walking but did not move closer. "Who's asking?" A pause. Then the rear door opened and a man stepped out onto the sidewalk. He was tall, which was the first thing she noticed. Lean and sharp in a dark coat that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his body. His hair was black and swept back from a face that was all angles and architecture, cheekbones that could cut glass above a jaw that looked like it had been designed to clench. He moved with a particular kind of stillness, the kind that belonged to people who had learned to control every muscle in their body because losing control, even for a moment, could get them killed. There was something familiar about him that she could not place, something in the way he stood, slightly angled, one shoulder forward, like he was bracing for something. "My name is Seokwon Yun," he said, and he watched her face the way a man watches a fuse after he has lit it. The name hit her like cold water seeping through fabric, spreading outward from a single point of contact until it reached everything. Seokwon Yun, the boy with the dictionary, the boy with the bowl cut and the too big shirt, and the drawing that she still kept in her nightstand drawer. The boy she had stood in front of on a playground 22 years ago, her fists clenched, her knees shaking, her 10-year-old heart beating so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "Seokwon?" she whispered, and the word felt strange in her mouth, like a language she had once spoken fluently but had not used in so long that her tongue had forgotten the shapes. He smiled, and it was the same smile. The same small, uncertain thing that had transformed his whole face on a cracked sidewalk in 1997. Older now, tempered by years and experiences she could not begin to imagine, but unmistakably his. "You remember me?" he said, and there was something in his voice that cracked slightly on the words, a fracture in the composure that suggested this moment meant more to him than he was prepared to show. "Of course I remember you." Siva's voice came out steadier than she felt. "How could I forget?" A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh. "I did disappear," he said. "For a while." What Ziva did not know, standing on that sidewalk in the amber glow of the one streetlight on Grover Street that still worked, was the shape of the life that Seokwon Yun had lived in the 2 decades since he vanished from her world. She did not know that his father's debts had followed them even to America. That a 12-year-old Seokwon had been pulled out of Ridgeway Elementary in the middle of the school year, returned to Seoul by an uncle who smelled like cigarettes and spoke in threats, and delivered into a world that made the Burnham Avenue neighborhood look like paradise. She did not know that the uncle was Yoon Jae-hyuk, the head of a syndicate that controlled significant portions of Seoul's construction and entertainment industries through methods that would never appear in any corporate filing. That Seokwon had been taken in, not out of familial love, but out of calculation, because the boy was smart, quiet, observant, and those were qualities that could be sharpened into weapons. She did not know that he had learned to fight before he learned to drive, learned to read a room before he learned to read a balance sheet, learned to command respect through silence because he had discovered, very young, that the most dangerous people in any room were the ones who never raised their voices. She did not know that at 26, he had taken control of his uncle's organization after a transfer of power that the Korean press described as a retirement, and that everyone in Seoul's underworld understood was something far less voluntary. That he had spent the next 6 years transforming the operation into a network of legitimate businesses, interwoven with shadow operations so seamlessly that even the most determined prosecutors could not find where one ended and the other began. All she knew was that the boy from the playground was standing in front of her, 22 years older and utterly transformed, and that looking at him felt like discovering a door in a wall she had always believed was solid. "You said you disappeared for a while," she said slowly. "Where did you go?" Seokwon looked at her for a long moment, and something moved behind his eyes, a calculation, and a decision being made in real time. Then he gestured toward the open car door. "That," he said, "is a longer conversation than a sidewalk deserves. Would you let me buy you dinner?" Every survival instinct Ziva possessed told her to say no. The car was too expensive. The man was too composed. The gap between the boy she remembered and the person standing before her was too vast to bridge over a single meal. But she recognized him. Not the coat, not the car, not the sharp jaw or the controlled stillness. She recognized the boy underneath all of it. The one who had stood by a chain-link fence with a folded piece of paper and 3 shaky English words, and a smile that asked for nothing except to not be alone. "Dinner," she said. "Just dinner. And you're paying, because I know for a fact that car costs more than my annual salary." Seokwon's smile widened, just slightly, and for a moment the man in the expensive coat disappeared entirely, replaced by a 10-year-old boy who had just been told he did not have to walk home alone. "Deal," he said. He took her to a restaurant she had driven past 100 times without ever considering that she might walk through its doors. It occupied the top floor of a building downtown, the kind of place where the elevator required a code, and the hostess greeted Seokwon by name with a bow that was subtle but unmistakable. The dining room was small, no more than 10 tables, each one separated by enough space to guarantee that conversations remained private. They were seated at a corner table that Ziva suspected was permanently reserved. She opened the menu and nearly choked. There were no prices listed. "So," she said, closing the menu and folding her hands on the table. "You found me. After 22 years, you tracked me down to a community center on Grover Street. I think you owe me an explanation, Seokwon." "I go by Yoon now," he said, "in my professional life, but you can call me whatever you want." He paused. "No one has called me Seokwon in a very long time. What do you want me to call you?" "Seokwon," he said finally. "From you, I want to hear Seokwon." The admission cost him something. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened after the words left his mouth. This was a man who did not make himself vulnerable easily, and the fact that he was doing it now told her more about the significance of this meeting than any explanation he could offer. "All right, Seokwon. Start from the beginning. What happened to you?" he told her. Not everything. She could sense the gaps, but enough. He told her about the uncle, about Seoul, about the years of education that had nothing to do with textbooks. He did not use the word criminal. He spoke of a family business, of responsibilities he had inherited, of a world that operated by different rules. But Ziva was not naive. She had grown up on Burnham Avenue. She knew what power looked like when it did not come from a ballot box or a corner office, and she recognized it sitting across from her now, dressed in a dark coat and speaking in careful euphemisms. "So you're telling me," she said slowly, "that the boy I protected on the playground grew up to become someone that other people need protecting from." The words landed between them like a stone dropped into still water, and she watched the ripples move across his face. He did not flinch. He did not look away. But something in his eyes dimmed, and she understood that her words had found something soft beneath all that armor. "Yes," he said simply. "That is exactly what I am telling you." "Why did you come find me?" she asked. "The real reason." Seokwon was quiet for a long time. The waiter returned with dishes neither of them had ordered and retreated without a word. Outside the window, the city lights pulsed and glittered. "Because I have spent 22 years becoming someone," he said at last, his voice stripped down to something raw. someone powerful, someone feared. I have built an empire, and none of it, not a single piece of it, has ever made me feel the way I felt when a girl I did not know stepped between me and the first person in America who tried to break me. He reached into his coat and produced something that made Ziva's breath catch in her throat. A piece of paper. Small, folded, its edges softened by years of handling. She recognized it even before he unfolded it. Only this one was his, the original she had never seen. A drawing of two figures, one taller and one smaller, standing side by side. Beneath them, in a child's careful handwriting, Korean characters she could not read. "What does it say?" she whispered. "It says, 'The brave girl who made me feel like I was worth saving.'" He refolded the paper and placed it back inside his coat. "I have carried this every day since I left. Every single day, Ziva. It reminded me that once, before all of this, someone looked at me and saw something worth defending. And I have never been able to forget that." Ziva's eyes burned and she blinked hard, refusing to cry in a restaurant that was too elegant for tears. "That's a lot of weight to put on a playground moment," she said. But her voice was thick, and they both knew she was deflecting. "It was not just a moment," Seokwan said quietly. "It was the only moment. Everything I am, everything I built on the foundation of that single act of kindness. You gave me that, and you did not even know what you were giving." The dinner continued, but something between them had fundamentally shifted. They talked for hours, long past the point where the other tables emptied. Ziva told him about Bridge House, about the funding cuts, about her mother still working at 71. And Seokwan listened with total focused attention, absorbing every word like it was a code he needed to crack. As they prepared to leave, Seokwan slid a business card across the table. His name and a phone number. Nothing else. The car pulled to a stop outside her apartment building just past midnight. "Thank you for dinner," she said, "and for telling me everything, or at least the parts you were willing to tell." Seokwan turned to look at her. "Your program. Bridge House. How long do you have before the funding runs out completely?" The question caught her off guard. 4 months, she said. "Maybe 5 if I cut the meal program, which I won't, because for some of those kids, it's the only real food they eat all day. And if someone were to offer you the resources to keep it running, not just surviving but thriving, what would you say?" "I would say it depends on who's offering and what they expect in return. And if what they wanted was simply to repay a debt that was 22 years overdue?" "I can't accept that," she said, and the words cost her more than she expected. "Not from you. Not knowing what I know about where your money comes from." Something flickered across Seokwan's face. Not anger, but something that looked almost like admiration. "You would turn down the thing you need most because of principle. I would turn down the thing I need most because accepting it from the wrong source would destroy the thing it was meant to save. Those kids trust me, Seokwan. Their parents trust me. I can't do that to them." "Then, let me find another way," he said, and there was an urgency in his voice that surprised her. "A legitimate channel. Something that cannot be traced back to anything that would compromise your work. Let me do this, Ziva. Please." The please was what undid her. This was not a man who said please very often. This was not a man who asked for anything, because men like him did not ask. They decided, they directed, they commanded. But he was asking her, and the vulnerability in that single word carved through every defense she had. "I need to think about it," she said. "Of course." She reached for the door handle, then stopped. "Seo Kwan." "Yes?" "The drawing. The one you showed me at dinner. You really carried it all this time?" He reached into his coat, took out the folded paper and held it where she could see it. In the faint glow from the streetlight, she could make out the faded lines of the two figures. 22 years of handling had worn the paper thin at the creases, had softened the edges until they were almost fabric, but the image endured. Every day, he said, without exception. Ziva got out of the car and stood on the sidewalk, watching the black sedan pull away. The night air was cool against her face, carrying the familiar smells of the neighborhood. She stood there for a long time, the business card growing warm against her palm. Her phone buzzed. A text from Katura, her oldest friend, the same girl who had been turning the rope during Double Dutch on the day everything started. "Hey girl, you good? Haven't heard from you all night." Ziva typed back, "I'm fine. Long day. Tell you about it later." But she knew she would not tell her. Some debts were too heavy to explain, and some doors, once opened, could never be closed again. She could feel it already. The pull. The gravity of Seo Kwan-yoon's world tugging at the edges of hers, bending the shape of her life towards something she could not yet see. But the drawing, that small folded piece of paper, carried every day for 22 years without exception. That was not the act of a man who wanted something from her. That was the act of a boy who had never stopped being grateful. And Ziva Okafor could not bring herself to turn her back on a boy who needed her. Even when the boy had become the most dangerous man she had ever met. She held out for 11 days. 11 days of staring at the business card on her nightstand. 11 days of walking into Bridge House and looking at the faces of the children who depended on her, knowing that the ceiling tiles were stained with water damage she could not afford to fix, that the heating system made sounds at night like an animal in pain, that the food budget had been cut so many times there was almost nothing left to cut. On the 12th day, she called. He answered before the second ring, and the speed of it told her something she was not sure she wanted to know. He had been waiting. "I have conditions," she said, skipping the greeting entirely. "I would be disappointed if you didn't. I want to see your legitimate businesses, the real operations, not the brochure version. I want a legal structure that separates your funding from my organization completely, a foundation with independent oversight. And I want you to understand that this is a professional arrangement. Those kids are not leverage. They are not collateral. If I ever feel like you are using them to manipulate me, I will burn the whole thing down myself before I let you have it." Silence on the other end. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its amusement. What remained was respect, unfiltered and unconcealed. "You have my word," he said, "on all of it." 3 weeks later, she stood inside a high-rise office building in the financial district, watching Seo Kwan-yoon conduct a meeting in a boardroom made entirely of glass. He had kept his promise. The tour of his legitimate operations had been thorough: a chain of commercial properties, a construction firm, a logistics company, a technology investment fund, all of it documented and audited. The people who ran these businesses treated him with deference, but they also looked at him with something she had not expected: trust. She saw it in the way a project manager showed him photographs of her daughter's graduation, in the way his executive assistant corrected him in front of visitors without hesitation. These were not the behaviors of people who worked for a monster. The legal structure was exactly what she had demanded: an independent charitable foundation, governed by a board that included 2 retired judges and a non-profit attorney. Bridge House would be shielded completely. "What are you thinking?" Seo Kwan asked, appearing beside her at the window after his meeting. "I'm thinking that you're making this very easy for me, and I'm not used to things being easy. I would prefer to understand why you're doing all of this. And do not tell me it's about repaying a debt." "You are right," he said. "It is not just about the debt. It is about what the debt represents. Proof that I am capable of something other than what I have become. When I fund Bridge House, I am proving to myself that the boy you saved still exists somewhere inside the man I built over him. That there is still something left worth saving." "He exists," Ziva said. and her voice came out softer than she intended. I can see him. He is standing right in front of me, trying very hard to hide behind a nice coat and a glass building. Seokwan looked at her, and something passed between them that neither of them was ready to name. The foundation paperwork will be ready by Friday, he said, his voice carefully neutral again. I have retained an attorney on your behalf. She is independent, has no connection to me, and her only obligation is to protect your interests, even against mine. You really have thought of everything. I have had 22 years to plan, Seokwan said. And the way he said it, quiet and matter of fact, made something deep inside Ziva tighten in a way she was rapidly losing the ability to ignore. The first 3 months were careful. Careful the way two people are careful when they know they are standing near the edge of something and neither wants to be the first to look down. The foundation was established, the money began to flow, and Bridge House transformed. New equipment arrived, then new furniture, then a proper kitchen that made Ziva's volunteer cooks weep with joy. A full-time staff was hired, tutors and counselors, and a nutritionist who redesigned the meal program so completely that children who had been coming in listless began to arrive with energy and something that looked dangerously like hope. Seokwan visited once a week, always on Thursdays, always in the early evening, always alone. Sometimes he helped with homework. Sometimes he played chess with the older kids, losing deliberately to the ones who needed a win and playing ruthlessly against the ones who needed a challenge. Sometimes he simply sat and watched, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes distant, and Ziva wondered what he was seeing. The children he might have been. The childhood he never had. It was during these Thursday visits that the walls between them began to thin. It started with small things. A conversation about a book she had mentioned weeks earlier that he had clearly gone out and read. A container of her mother's jollof rice that she brought one evening, watching his face as he tasted it for the first time, the surprise and delight that broke through his composure like sunlight through clouds. A moment when one of the younger children, a 6-year-old named Farai, who had not spoken to any adult male since arriving at Bridge House, climbed into Seokwan's lap without warning and fell asleep, and Seokwan sat perfectly still for 40 minutes, rather than risk waking her, his eyes meeting Ziva's across the room with an expression of such bewildered tenderness that she had to look away before she said something she could not take back. She learned that he read poetry in Korean before bed, that he could not swim, that he donated anonymously to 3 orphanages in Seoul, that his favorite sound in the world was rain against a window. He learned that she sang in the shower, that she kept every drawing every child at Bridge House had ever given her in a box under her bed that was running out of room. We are becoming friends, Ziva said one Thursday after the last child had been collected, and they were sitting in the empty main room drinking tea from mismatched mugs. Is that a problem? For someone in your position? It is a vulnerability, he said. In my world, the people you care about become the people your enemies use against you. And yet, here you are, drinking tea from a mug that says, "World's okayest teacher" on it. It was a gift from a 9-year-old who could not spell greatest. I did not have the heart to correct him. Something shifted in his face. Ziva. Yes? I am not here on Thursdays because of Bridge House. The foundation runs perfectly without my involvement. There is no operational reason for me to be here every week. I know, Ziva said quietly. You know. I have known for about 6 weeks. Probably longer, if I am being honest with myself, which I try to avoid because it complicates things. Seokwan stared at her, and she watched something happen to his face. The composure cracked. Not dramatically, but slowly, like ice thawing, and underneath it was something raw and unguarded. Then why haven't you said anything? He asked. Because saying it makes it real. And if it is real, then we have to decide what to do about it. And if I told you I was ready, I would say, you are the head of an organization that operates on both sides of the law, that you have enemies who would use me to hurt you, and that falling in love with you would be the most reckless thing I have ever done. She paused, meeting his eyes. And then I would ask you to please stop looking at me like that, because it makes it very difficult to remember all the reasons I am supposed to say no. Like what? Seokwon said, and his voice was low and rough, stripped of every layer of protection he normally wore. Like I am the only real thing you have ever seen. Seokwon reached across the distance between them, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and took her hand. You are, he said, the only real thing. Everything else is architecture. You are the foundation. She thought of her mother, of Adoniah's rough hands and fierce love. You are extraordinary, Ziva, and one day, the whole world is going to know it. She kissed him. It was not graceful. Her nose bumped against his, and the folding chair creaked ominously beneath her shifting weight. But his hand came up to cup the side of her face with a gentleness that contradicted everything the world believed about him, and he kissed her back, with a careful, trembling restraint that told her he had been imagining this moment for far longer than she had. When they finally pulled apart, Ziva laughed. A real laugh, big and reckless, the one she had always loved about herself, and it filled the empty room like music. Well, she said, that was probably a terrible decision. Probably, Seokwon agreed. But he was smiling, that same small, uncertain smile from 22 years ago, and it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. The call came at 2:17 in the morning on a Sunday in late January. Siva was asleep, deep in the dreamless dark that only comes after complete exhaustion. Her phone vibrated against the nightstand, and she fumbled for it in the dark, squinting at the screen. Doyun. Not Seokwon. Doyun, his driver, his shadow, the man whose face she had learned to read over months of Thursday visits, and who had slowly, reluctantly, begun to treat her with something that approached warmth. Doyen never called her. The fact that he was calling at 2 in the morning meant that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Miss Okafor. His voice was flat, controlled, but she could hear the tremor underneath it. There has been an incident. Ziva was already out of bed, already reaching for the jeans draped over her chair, already shoving her feet into shoes without bothering with socks. Where is he? The warehouse on Chelton Avenue. He is alive. A pause that lasted a lifetime. But it is bad, Miss Okafor. It is very bad. She drove through empty streets, her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran 2 red lights and did not notice. All she could think was his name, over and over, a one-word prayer offered to whatever forces governed the space between life and death. The warehouse was nondescript. 2 men flanked the entrance but stepped aside when they saw her. She followed the sound of voices to a back room with a table, industrial lighting, and medical supplies she recognized from the inventory she had helped organize months ago. He was lying on the table, and there was so much blood that for a moment she could not process what she was seeing. It covered his shirt, his hands, the surface beneath him, pooling on the concrete floor. Doyen was pressing a wad of fabric against Seokwon's left side, his hand steady, but his face the color of old paper. What happened? Ziva demanded, snapping into the clinical register she had learned through her emergency medical training. Ambush, Doyen said. The meeting with the Haesung group. It was a setup. He took a knife wound to the abdomen. There may be internal bleeding. Ziva's hands moved with a precision that surprised even her, pulling away the blood-soaked fabric, exposing the wound, cataloging what she saw. The knife wound was deep, a clean lateral cut across the lower left abdomen. She could not tell from the surface whether it had reached anything vital. He needs a hospital, she said, reaching for her phone. No. Seokwan's hand found her wrist with a grip that was shockingly strong. The Haesung group has people in the emergency departments. If I show up at any hospital in this city tonight, they will finish what they started. Then you will bleed out on this table, Seokwan. Then get me care that is not in a hospital. You are the most resourceful person I have ever met. So be resourceful. She stared at him for 3 seconds. 3 seconds in which she allowed herself to feel everything. Then she sealed all of it away and became the person he needed her to be. Doyun, keep pressure on the wound. Do not let up. She dialed a number she had not used in over a year. Dr. Adeyemi, this is Ziva Okafor. I know it is the middle of the night, and I know I have no right to ask you this, but I need you. Right now. A man's life depends on it. Dr. Kehinde Adeyemi had been Ziva's mentor during her master's program, a former combat medic turned trauma surgeon turned professor who had retired from active practice 2 years ago. She was 67 years old, sharp as a scalpel, and she owed Ziva nothing. But Ziva had spent 2 years as her research assistant, had driven her to chemotherapy appointments when the breast cancer came, had sat with her in waiting rooms and held her hand in the dark. There are debts between women that exist outside the language of obligation. Tell me what you need, Dr. Adeyemi said. A surgeon. Here, tonight. Off the books. Abdominal knife wound. Possible internal bleeding. Send me the address. The 31 minutes between that call and Dr. Adeyemi's arrival were the longest of Ziva's life. She kept Seokwan conscious by talking, a steady stream of words about the children at Bridge House, about Farai who had started speaking in full sentences, about the 9-year-old who had finally learned to spell greatest. She told him everything except the thing she most needed to say, because saying it now, with his blood on her hands, felt too much like a goodbye. Stay with me, she said. You do not get to leave. You owe me 22 years of Thursday evenings and a lifetime of badly misspelled mugs, and I am not letting you out of that debt. Bossy, he whispered. And despite everything, she almost laughed. Dr. Adeyemi arrived carrying 2 bags with a look on her face that combined competence with exasperation. When you set off the books, I assumed you meant a clinic, not a shipping warehouse. I want you to know that I am judging you very intensely right now. Judge me later. Save him now. I intend to do both. The surgery took 4 hours. The knife had nicked the lower edge of his spleen. Dr. Adeyemi repaired it with steady hands, humming softly to herself as she worked. A habit Ziva remembered from their years together. When it was over, Ziva sat on the concrete floor with her back against the wall and let her head fall forward onto her knees. He is going to live, Dr. Adeyemi said, sitting down beside her. The spleen repair will hold. He will need weeks of rest, and if he does anything strenuous for at least a month, I will come back here and hurt him myself. Ziva told her everything. The playground, the drawing, the 22 years, the reunion, Bridge House, the kiss on a folding chair. Dr. Adeyemi listened without interrupting. When Ziva finished, the older woman took her hand. Let me tell you something about love. Something they do not teach you in any program. Love is not a reward for finding someone who fits neatly into your life. Love is a choice you make with your eyes open, knowing the full cost. She paused. I married a man named Tunde, an investigative journalist in Lagos during the military government years. He exposed corruption, challenged powerful men. I spent 15 years married to a man who came home some nights with bruises, and other nights did not come home at all. And every morning I woke up next to him was a morning I had to consciously choose not to let the fear win. How? Ziva asked. How did you make that choice every day? By understanding that the alternative was worse. I could have found a safe man who came home at the same time every evening, but that safe man would not have had Tunde's courage, or the way he looked at me when he thought I was not watching. like I was the reason he kept fighting. She squeezed Ziva's hand. I saw his face when you were working on him tonight. That is the look of a man who sees you as the reason for his life. I am terrified, Kehinde. Everything you have built was built on the belief that people deserve to be seen and defended, regardless of who they are. You demonstrated it when you were 10 years old on a playground. If you walk away from this man because his life is complicated, you are not protecting yourself. You are betraying the principle that has defined your entire existence. The words hit Ziva with the force of something she had always known, but never been brave enough to articulate. And Ziva? The next time you call me at 2 in the morning, it had better be because you are having a baby. Not because you need me to perform surgery in a warehouse. He woke at dawn. The warehouse had gone quiet. The early light filtered through grimy windows set high in the walls, casting long, pale rectangles across the concrete floor. Ziva was sitting beside him when his eyes opened. "You are still here," he said, his voice cracked and barely audible. "Where else would I be? You should go. Every hour you spend near me is an hour closer to the day when someone uses you to destroy me, and I will not survive that, Ziva. Not the losing you, the knowing that it was my fault." "Are you finished?" she asked calmly. "Because I sat on a concrete floor for 4 hours while a 67-year-old woman with bad knees repaired your spleen, and I have come to some conclusions." He said nothing. She took that as permission. Conclusion 1. I am in love with you. Not with your money, not with your power. I am in love with the boy who drew a picture of two people standing side by side and carried it in his pocket for 22 years because a girl was kind to him once. That boy is who I fell in love with, and I am not leaving him. Conclusion 2. I am terrified. But I have been terrified before. I was terrified every day growing up on Burnham Avenue, and I survived. I will survive this too, because I am Adonaiah Okafor's daughter, and I do not break. She leaned forward, bringing her face close to his. Conclusion 3. You do not get to make this decision for me. I am a grown woman who has weighed the costs, and I am choosing you. All of you. The poetry and the violence and the Thursday visits and the knife wounds. So stop trying to save me from yourself, and let me love you. Because I am going to do it anyway, and it will be significantly less exhausting for both of us if you cooperate. Then his hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with a deliberateness that felt like a vow. "No one has ever fought for me," he said, his voice barely a breath. "Not since you. 22 years, and no one has ever stood in front of me and said I was worth the cost. Then everyone you have known for the last 22 years has been wrong," Ziva said. "And I have been right since I was 10. He kissed her with a desperation that tasted like salt and antiseptic, and something underneath that she recognized as the flavor of a man who had finally stopped running from the only thing that had ever saved him. "If you ever get stabbed again," she whispered, "I am going to be very upset with you." "Noted," he said, and she felt his smile against her skin like a promise. 6 weeks later, the Haesung group made their move. Ziva was at Bridge House on a Tuesday afternoon, helping Farai sound out the words in a picture book about a rabbit who wanted to fly, when Doyun appeared in the doorway with an expression that emptied her lungs of air. She had learned to read him over the months, and what she saw on his face now was fear, badly concealed. On a man like Doyun, badly concealed fear was the equivalent of anyone else screaming. "Miss Okafor," he said, "we need to leave. Now." "In the car," Doyun told her. The Haesung group had been surveilling Bridge House. Photographs of the children, of the staff, of Ziva entering and leaving at predictable times. They had sent Seokwan a message that was brief and unambiguous. "End your expansion into our territories, or we begin with the woman and the children she protects. Not herself. She could handle threats to herself. But the children. Farai and the 9-year-old who made misspelled mugs, and the 67 faces that trusted her to keep them safe. That was a line she had not imagined anyone would cross. Seokwan was waiting at the high-rise office, standing at the window. But the man at the window now was something older and colder, his face stripped of everything soft, his body held with a stillness she recognized as the precursor to violence. She had never been afraid of him. She was not afraid of him now. But she was afraid of what he might become if she was not careful with the next few minutes. "Tell me," she said. And he did. "If I do this," he said, and his voice was the voice of a man standing on the edge of something he could not come back from, "I become something I cannot undo. The boy you have been trying so hard to find and protect does not survive it. If I do what needs to be done to keep you safe, I lose him forever." "There is another option," she said. "There is no other option. There is always another option. You taught me that. You taught me that when you built a foundation with independent oversight instead of just writing a check. You have spent the last year proving that there is always a way to do the right thing without becoming the wrong person. So do not stand here and tell me that the only path forward is the one that destroys you." "They threaten the children, Ziva." His voice broke on the word, cracking like a bone under pressure. "They threatened your children. They are our children," she said, and the word landed between them with a weight that changed everything. "Ours. And we are going to protect them. But not like this. What if we leave? Not running. Strategically. What if we relocate Bridge House? Move the children somewhere outside the Haisung Group's reach? What if we use your resources, the legitimate ones, to build something bigger and safer? And my organization? Transition it. You have been moving toward legitimacy for years. Accelerate the timeline. Step back. Not out of weakness, but out of strength. Because the most powerful thing you can do right now is refuse to become what they expect." She watched the war end behind his eyes. Not with a bang, but with a quiet, exhausted settling, like a man who had been holding his breath for 22 years finally letting it go. "You are asking me to give up everything I have built. I am asking you to build something better. With me. For them." She took both of his hands in hers. "That boy from the drawing is not going to die, Seokwan. I will not let him. I did not stand in front of Marcus Treadwell on a playground in 1997 just to lose you now. That is not how this story ends." He pulled her against him, and she felt his tears against her neck, hot and silent. The tears of a man who had spent his entire life building walls and had finally found someone worth tearing them down for. "How do you do this?" he whispered. "How do you look at me and see something worth saving, when I have spent my whole life proving that I am not?" Ziva pulled back, cupped his face in her hands the way her mother had cupped hers every night of her childhood, and looked into his eyes with the fierce, concentrated love that Adonaya Okafor had taught her was the most powerful force in the universe. "Because I am extraordinary," she said, "and the whole world is about to know it." In the weeks that followed, they built a plan. Bridge House relocated to a new facility in a neighboring city, larger and better equipped. Seokwan began the slow, painful process of restructuring his organization, elevating trusted lieutenants, divesting from the shadows, channeling the empire he had built into something that could withstand the light. It was not easy. There were nights when the weight of what they were attempting seemed impossible. But every morning she woke up beside a man who looked at her like she was the reason he kept choosing to be better. And every evening she walked into Bridge House and saw the faces of children who were thriving because two people had decided that the cycle of violence could be broken, not with more violence, but with the stubborn, reckless, unreasonable belief that goodness was stronger. Farai drew them a picture. Two figures, one taller and one smaller, standing side by side. The taller figure had cornrows and a gap-toothed smile. The smaller one was holding a book. Above them, in a 6-year-old's imperfect handwriting, were 3 words that Ziva had seen before, 22 years and a lifetime ago, on a folded piece of paper offered by a boy who did not yet know the shape of his own future. Thank you, friend. Ziva put the drawing on the wall of her office, next to the original that Seokwan had finally given her, smoothed and framed and preserved behind glass like the sacred thing it was. 2 drawings, 22 years apart. The same message, passed from hand to hand across time and circumstance, and the vast, complicated distance between who we are and who we have the courage to become. The universe keeps meticulous records, and some debts are not meant to be repaid, they are meant to be multiplied.